Thanks, Kate. Thanks a million for coming here today and chatting to us.
Very welcome.
Yeah, so it's great. Yeah, we've been talking to a couple of people doing different roles within within film so far. I'm just trying to get a sense of what their job involves, their career, how their career developed. But one of the things that I think is obviously everyone is experiencing at the moment is very different work practices, etc. in lockdown. How's that been for you in terms of how you're working?
Yeah, well, it was very quiet when the first lockdown hit. I actually kind of went back to basics with Ken Wardrop. Myself and himself went out and did a documentary about COVID. So that was kind of, I suppose, like, more recently I've been getting used to sort of bigger crews and sort of delegating and stuff. So it was quite funny just to go back down to the very basics of having a camera kit, at home.
Just the two of you.
And just the two of us downloading, like, literally everything. But, I guess it's sort of a testament to just the kind of the joy that is filmmaking, that you don't need all the toys or the kind of fanfare, that it's just like once you have an idea, you have a camera and off you go.
Great. And have you finished that?
Well, we kind of started it, and then at the time we thought, okay, well, maybe 3-4 months. So basically the film was about inverted commas cocooners. I don't like using that word now, but at the time it was sort of like, okay, maybe that's a nice term, but it's
funny how quickly language has been changed.
Yeah. And so we thought, okay, well, this cohort of people will be back out in the world, maybe 3-4 months. And so we were kind of imagining the end of the film, just like, the world opening up. And that didn't happen. Or, it sort of, I suppose it happened sort of subtly over the summer, but it just wasn't like something visually that you could see, kind of like a punctuated.
Yeah, people didn't just suddenly emerge.
And so I think probably the end of the film will be sort of, vaccinations. So we're still filming.
Great.
So that was the first lockdown. Then I did a feature in the autumn, and it was the first sort of, like, I suppose I did a commercial before that, but basically, like, instead of going physically meeting people, that you would sort of like do most of your meetings on Zoom like everybody else. And it actually wasn't kind of as bad as I thought it would be. Like, there is a certain focus that comes with Zoom when sometimes you're in the room with the same person. It's like you get easily distracted.
Sure.
And also I find Google Docs very useful, where it's kind of like you can share, like you can input, your shot list, and with a director you can be feeding into that same document simultaneously, which I wouldn't have been doing before.
Sure.
Before this kind of remote prep. So yeah, I mean, at a certain point you have to get out and start looking at locations and meeting team members and stuff.
But you have been on set.
Yeah, on set then. So all the PPE testing. It sort of takes, a little bit of the kindness out of human connection. I mean, we're all experiencing that now, but I think
and the spontaneity,
when you're under pressure and everybody's under pressure, the communication, when it's just like, the eyes, we always thought everything was in the eyes, but turns out there was a lot more going on. Yeah. So yeah, it's like, I think there's a lot of subtle communication that happens silently. Even when you're rolling, you might sort of gesture to somebody, like, to, you'll mouth something. that they understand what it is.
Yeah.
So all of that communication is completely stripped, and I can see like some crew members really struggling. They're wrestling, trying to kind of pull this aside to say what they want to say, and it's like, no, you have to just keep it on.
Yeah.
So it is a bit tiring, I would say, like in comparison to what you would have done before. Like it does take a little bit of the energy out of things.
And
I
presumably
don't know, it's doable. It's like totally doable.
well, which is great, isn't it? Because I mean, at first we thought it wasn't
Yeah.
doable.
Yeah, exactly. Because I guess filmmaking is such a collaborative force.
You must have been shooting normal people right up to.
Well, they were posting right up until. So I
When
think
did the shoot finish?
towards the end of our grading, we were starting to think, okay, is this okay that we're in the same room? I don't know. And then there was kind of like discussion about masks and stuff, and I don't think at that point anyone was wearing masks. We were all in the same room. That would have been March, I guess. So yeah, I mean, they literally got that through the gap, like just so tight. I think there was towards the very end, some of the sound mixes and stuff, a lot of that would have been done remotely. But yeah, like grading now is like you're in a separate room and it's talking over an open call, and it's just I suppose we all just find ways, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, we might ask you about normal people, because you were shooting, from right, that you shot the last 6 episodes, did you?
Yeah, that's right.
And what could you talk a little bit about what it's like, that process where you're coming in? Obviously, you have to maintain a consistency of tone, and how do you work in that scenario where presumably you're also trying to bring something of your own vision to it?
Sure.
How does that dynamic work?
Yeah, no, it was a completely new space for me, because up until that point, I would have always have kind of sat down with the director and sort of established a look. So, it was a challenge for me to kind of step into that, but I was sort of excited at seeing what another team would what direction they'd go with it, and their response to the scripts. And then I suppose it's sort of, instead of feeling like you're kind of restrained by it, that you would, embrace it and sort of feed into it with your own kind of personality. So yeah, I think like it was the first time I would have seen rushes coming in from, I would have read the first read maybe the first 3 episodes, so I knew what they were tackling, and I could see the rushes coming in, and so that was just like a real privilege to be able to see, other people's responses. Well, Susie and Lenny's take on it. So I think that like our episodes were probably moving into a more kind of darker place, and a little trickier for the characters. So there was sort of scope there, I guess, to take the lighting a little bit more dark, and maybe a little bit more angular. So myself and Hetty had a lot of fun. Like we hadn't worked together before, so it was a whole new kind of venture. And I hadn't worked with any of the crew before, even though they were all, Irish crew.
Wow. That must be quite a rare occurrence in
yeah. Well, like Susie would have set up the crew, and then it was, keeping that crew together for continuity.
Was that difficult then, essentially, you coming in at a midpoint in terms of the working relationships there?
Yeah, I mean, I was like very stressed about that first day. I was like, oh God.
Imagine.
Because you have to gain their respect, because they're thinking, oh, who's this new one coming in now, and she hasn't done a huge amount, has she? Because I've done like 2 TV series prior to that, so it was like, still very early days for me. And so what we did, actually, myself and Hetty, we did a kind of a day like rehearsals with the cast, so that I could meet the cast, and then we could sort of like start the process of like rehearsing, blocking, and sort of discussing how we might tackle it. And that was brilliant. You know, to sort of get the opportunity to do that on a location. And yeah, I think also just for myself and Hetty to kind of establish or continue the, you know, the relationship that had been set up in prep. So
Sure.
then I think by the time it came to the first day, at least there was, you know, the dialogue had begun, and okay, you have the whole fanfare around you, but you know, you just sort of get on with it. And the, you know, the crew were really supportive, great crew. So yeah, you know, it was like very good experience for me.
Great. I might come back in a little while actually and just talk a little bit more about that kind of idea about relationships on set and those sorts of things.
Sure.
But I wanted just while it's fresh to ask you about Arat, because which is I just watched again last week. It's such a great film. I enjoyed it so much, and it's so beautifully shot. And just wonder, could you tell us a little bit about the process of shooting it? And it strikes me that there was probably quite a lot of specific challenges to shooting that film in terms of where,
in terms of weather.
And where, yeah, I mean, you know, I'm just looking at my window now here in the west of Ireland and imagining.
Yeah, I mean, the first step on that film was to go out with Tom Sullivan, the director, in a car and just get out into the countryside and start looking. And we did that even before the funding was closed on the film. Like, it was part of trying to get people on board. So, you know, we went out and started driving around, and it's just such a nice way also to then start to discuss the film and while you're on the road. And you know, it wasn't like we found exactly where we needed to shoot, but the conversation was started, and it was sort of like, okay, this isn't going to work. We need to shoot this time of the year. You know, what about weather, and how do we, you know, how do we sort of embrace it, you know, even though it's coming horizontally at you. I mean, actually, we were quite lucky in the end, and also in terms of the weather on the sea, because that was like a massive factor as well. But so yeah, so we did our recce's, and then when we actually got funding, then it was back over again to sort of find specific places. And I suppose because resources were tight, we needed to find everything within, you know, a kind of a half an hour of each other. So we settled in Lettermullen, and our kind of production base was in Carrow. Sure. But we had kind of like a shed. It wasn't a studio, but it was a shed where we did the interiors of the cave. So yeah, Porrick O'Neill, he built cave with sort of foam and painted it, and so that was the whole kind of interior section. And then we found the local fisherman actually told us about this little gully, and then sort of built an exterior cave at the back end of that gully. So yeah, like the tide was a big factor in the gully, because once the tide was fully in, it filled right up to the top. So there was no space for the camera. And then once the tide was out, it was completely out. There was no sea. So it was like, okay, how do we, because you don't want the space to look, oh, is this the same place we were in just a moment ago? Because with the sea there and with it out, it just looks completely different. So yeah, it was about sort of tracking the tide continually.
Wow, that must have put serious pressure on shooting schedules.
Yeah, I mean, also when you're shooting with a kid, that's already a kind of a muddle, you know, to figure out, because you've got this tiny window in the day, and then you need to sort of plan for a double and how you might use a double, and is the other actor okay to act or to complete the scene without the child actor there. So Donal was very like generous in that way, that he gave a lot to Saoirse, and Saoirse would rap and then he would have to complete scenes without her. So yeah. So yeah, the weather, tide, kids' hours, I suppose out at sea as well, like
Sure.
currachs, and yeah, like we had 4 weeks to shoot, which sounds like maybe lots of time, but it's not. It really isn't. We could have done easily with another week, but somehow we made it work. I mean, I think let's say the scene underwater where he's sort of Coleman is struggling to end his life and then decides he'll continue on, like that's a big kind of plot point, and I think visually it was very thin on the ground there, because that day we'd planned a section of hours in the day for underwater. In the end we only had an hour, because of various different problems that arose, and so like all of a sudden this huge kind of plot point is like squeezed into an hour of shooting underwater, which then the actual time that you're rolling there is like maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes.
So how you had conceived that scene visually was quite different then, was it?
Yeah, I mean, it was always going to be a challenge. It's just, I guess, even on the day, then it became even more reduced in terms of what we could achieve. And I suppose, Donal had to undertake quite a serious dieting regime prior to the film, and so the plan was to shoot all the scenes where we would see sort of the physicality of his body post famine in the first week, and then that he would gradually go back to eating normally, so that by the end we would film the sort of pre-famine scenes.
Sure.
Where he looks sort of healthy enough. So that put a serious amount of pressure again on just getting all those scenes in the first week, and the underwater scene fell into that category. And so yeah, there was just it's kind of amazing that it did actually get finished, and works.
Can I ask, kind of maybe in a more general sense, like presumably, when you're working with restrained resources, these sorts of compromises happen all the time, between how you conceived of a shot and what you were able to do. And can you talk a little bit about that, and how you even just sort of not allowing that to depress you, that we didn't get what we wanted. I presume you're constantly having to kind of remake the film in your head to some extent as on the fly.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you're not doing that, like you need to be, I think, responding each day to what you're getting, and a lot of the time you plan something to the nth degree, and then for whatever reason you shoot it differently, and it's so much better. you couldn't have even considered it.
Sure.
But it's just when all the elements come together, the actors are there in the space, and you just see something different, or you realize actually what you had conceived is completely wrong for that moment. And so I think you have to be continually open to the possibility that either A, your plan is like flawed, or B, it was the plan, but there's actually another way to do this, and you can still deliver the same sentiment. It's just in a different way.
Sure. And does it take a little bit of time to kind of get confident in that? Do you know,
Mm,
like preparing is a way of trying to control,
mm.
is the situation that you're going to be in. So, does it take a bit of experience before you kind of, it becomes easier to let go of that preparation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still learning that uh, that process. I think like I still quite like to shot list, even if I don't look at the shot list all day. It'll be in my back pocket.
Yeah,
I won't take it out. But it's just a sort of it helps me kind of just focus for I tend to kind of do it a week in advance of each week, just sort of lay it out, even though I would have talked through the scenes with the director, weeks before. But it's just when like really in those last 2 weeks of prep for a project, everything starts to fall into place or not, as the case may be. But it means that it's always this kind of mad gallop to just before you start to shoot, and you might have all these kind of nice sort of shot lists or just scene discussions laid out, but then through a series of circumstances, the location changes or the costume doesn't work, or whatever the various parts, you have to kind of reconsider and reassess what you've decided previously.
sure.
And I don't think that's, well, for me it's not like a weakness to reconsider or change your plan. It's just that's actually what you need to be doing all the time. And even maybe on after the first take, you might even change things because you realize, wait, now I was sort of blind to it up until now, but it's just sort of made itself clear that they shouldn't be standing for this moment, they need to be seated or whatever it is. I
Yeah,
think you
yeah,
have to be kind of brave to just halt the army because sometimes it's hard to, you have a whole crew working towards one particular, you know whatever it is, like it's a setup, and then maybe halfway through that you realize, what, this actually is completely overkill for the moment. It just needs to be one light, or it just needs
sure.
to be like one little move. So sometimes it is hard to stop that when you've already kind of demanded, I need this and this by this time, and then it's, you realize, oh, actually it could be done a lot simpler.
Sure.
Like, I think we often tend to complicate things beforehand, and then it somehow just finds its way.
You got to be open to the happy accidents.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, great.
And like, it's still a process because I'll watch films that I've done and then realize, oh, you know what, I could have done that much simpler afterwards.
Sure. Um, and could you, talk about a little bit about your relationship with the director in that process? Both in pre-production and production, when when how that planning unfolds, at what stage you come on board, and also, and actually, how do you decide on projects that you're interested in, or what brings you to projects in the first place?
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's kind of a tricky one sometimes with projects, because you might have a couple of things come in at the same time, and I guess fundamentally it's the script, whether you're connect with the script in some way. For me, I need to have a sort of a strong connection, whether it's something like a story or a place that I've never understood and want to try and figure out, or it's something familiar to me that I want to explore further. But I think you need to have that sort of instinctual connection with a story,
Mm,
because you're going to spend crazy hours of the day working on it, and yeah, it needs to have that tie. And then the director is kind of key as well, because fundamentally they're going to bring to it, like, the what way is the story going to be told, and what's the approach or the tone, because you can read a script 4 or 5 different ways as well. So it's sitting down with the director and saying, right, what is it that's drives you to this script, and what is it that you're excited about or interested in, or.
And has it happened, for example, you read a script and it grabs you, you see it in a particular way, and you sit down with the director, and she or he sees it differently, or and do you what happens then?
Yeah, I mean, I guess sometimes it has happened that way, but so if they sort of see it quite differently, then, and that I don't maybe sort of appreciate that, I might not go with the project then,
Yeah.
even though maybe the script is strong. But then also, I guess if they present like a different way of looking at the story, and it's actually much more interesting than I would have thought myself, or it's opened up another level to the script, then then I really have to kind of consider it. So I think, yeah, it's I'm probably quite malleable as a character. I'll be stubborn about some things, but like I like sort of leaning into other people's sort of headspace, and
Yeah.
trying to understand their way of thinking. And I think that's probably that is kind of the work of a cinematographer in a way, is sort of leaning in and trying to understand other people's viewpoints.
Sure.
So I think you'll always be wrestling if you have fundamentally a very different sort of concept in your head, that you're quite strong on, or feel quite sort of loyal to, then it's just not going to end well. Like, of course you can negotiate, like, but I think fundamentally you and the director need to be like on the same page in terms of a tone or a sensibility, to the script.
Sure. And I mean, you mentioned Ken Waldrop there at the start, and you've worked obviously with him and with Emer Reynolds, on more than one film. Does that make it easier when you have that relationship established, that working relationship?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's you've sort of, especially with documentary, you spend so much time together. It's like, there's just a unspoken kind of understanding there, and shorthand to knowing, oh yeah, no, she won't like that, or that's not his, so you don't have to have that whole conversation. I think you have to be careful not to kind of stagnate as well, like any kind of relationship. It's sort of like becoming complacent, where you might assume things.
Sure.
So yeah, you have to, I think, also work hard to kind of keep that alive, and that curiosity, and keep challenging each other.
Sure. And it is, I mean, you talked about documentary, and obviously you've shot documentary, you shot feature films, you shot television, drama. Are those planning processes quite similar or different in terms of approaching, even in pre-production?
Yeah, I mean, I guess fundamentally it's the same thing, in a sense that you've got an idea, you sit down with the director and try and understand what it is that they're, what sort of approach they want to take with it. And then you have to find a way to sort of realize that. But then I guess with documentary, you can plan. I mean, okay, so within the documentary, you've got, a huge sort of range of films, and more recently, I suppose I've done more kind of it's not docudrama, but let's say with Emer Reynolds films, you know, it's quite planned visual response to ideas within the film or ideas that come up in interviews. So that's almost like a kind of a hybrid of
Sure.
drama documentary, because you're planning for like a studio shoot where you need to get, you know, various resources together, and you know, you put a shot list and lighting plans and, you know, all that stuff. So that's sort of the middle point. And then you have maybe a, you know, cinema verte doc where you just need to, I think, have a really strong sense of the director's like sensibility towards the topic that you're filming, so that when you go in the room and you can't talk to each other necessarily, you have to kind of, you know, observe that you're going to make the right choices at the right time. Of course, you know, after maybe half an hour filming, you can step outside the room, or, you know, take a breath of fresh air and sort of recap or reassess. But it's the same process that we were talking about earlier, you know, where you're sort of, you have a plan, you go in, you start filming, and then maybe some things need to change. So you have to kind of reassess again and see and adapt. And
Sure.
I can't, sorry, I'm maybe going off topic a little bit. Also the prep, the prep for these different films. Like, I guess then, you know, with fiction, you get to go to locations, so you start to realize and you almost, you have it. I suppose it's kind of like you've more of a chance to build up the world in your mind.
Sure.
Whereas a documentary, it's still quite abstract until you get there and sort of get stuck in. And with documentary, I guess you're having to edit as you go. So it's, you know, you can sort of pre-plan to an extent, but then it's very much kind of instinctual responses once you have the camera on your shoulder, you know. So
no, that's great. And I presume, I mean, if you went back 20 years, if you're shooting for TV, you're kind of more restricted in terms of how you conceptualize, you know, what you're shooting. Whereas now, do you need to think about shooting TV drama differently to shooting feature film, or would it
be? Yeah, I mean, there's a massive crossover at the moment, and there's a lot of feature directors that are, you know, I've sort of agreed finally to do TV. And I think, you know, it is quite an interesting space. Like, let's say the likes of Steve McQueen.
Yeah.
With small acts, like you watch those individual episodes and they could be sort of complete films, or they are complete films in a way. And so that's quite different to the episodical idea of sort of like, I suppose there's maybe TV that's a bit more formulaic, where, you know, you have the same characters, the same locations, and you're continually going through series after series. And it's important to keep a continuity,
Sure,
you know, throughout. So it's sort of almost set up like, you know, Game of Thrones or Vikings or something like that. It's, you know, it's established from the start, and it's carried through. I think that, like, you know, telly is no longer kind of just a small screen, maybe. I mean, of course, people watch anything on their phones now. They watch feature films on their phones. I hope they don't watch my films on their phone. You know, I'll watch. I don't have a telly, so I just project on the wall. So then you can, you know, have a large screen at home. I think also because of the pandemic now, you know, everybody's home viewing. They've maybe put a bit more time and thought into it, but it's definitely opening up. And I think, like, let's say with Normal People, that's a great example of how, say, a book adapted and using the form of a chapter within each episode, that's a half-hour episode, that you don't have to maybe get into lots of exposition, that you kind of deal with sort of simpler plot beats in a shorter space of time, and you can sort of rest in them a little longer. You don't have to be galloping along to sort of tell the story. I think, traditionally maybe TV there was a lot of cutting, and the sense of like having to, move the audience through quickly, and that they might change the channel.
Yeah. Is that, I mean, as a cinematographer, shooting something like Normal People with that kind of space to breathe, is that like, is that something, is that what you want? Is that a pleasure? Do you think,
Oh yeah,
I
yeah,
get
for sure.
to flex my muscles here a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that's very much my space. I guess, I mean, it depends on the project, but just being able to hold a shot or hold an audience within a frame, that's just real power of image making.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I certainly would rally for the longer developing shots. Of course, there's moments, when you want to shake it up, and
Sure.
might need sort of a series of faster cuts and stuff. But yeah, like I think Normal People was a great sort of canvas for just really kind of bedding down and sort of exploring, love, or, relationships, communication within relationships.
Absolutely. There's a question in here. Someone wondering about the role of the cinematographer in terms of storytelling specifically. And actually, there was a quote I saw from the cinematographer on Mank, who was saying he thinks cinematographers are overcredited for the way films look and undercredited for the way the story is told. To what extent would you
Interesting, yeah.
conceive of what you do, of your job as storytelling, as opposed to your job being visual primarily?
Yeah, it might be actually a misunderstood. I think that's a really interesting observation. Like, you are fundamentally a storyteller. Like, that's what's drew me to cinema. Like, I started like drawing, painting as a kid, and then got a stills camera at 14. And I think that my sort of step into cinema or filmmaking was about sort of collaborating with people and telling a story, and sort of all working towards this one kind of focal point. I think that, yeah, like with the image making, you're only, as a cinematographer, you're only as good as what's presented in front of you. Of course, you can shape that, but like the location, production design, costume, it's all like it all is, that's image making. So like I think he's right there in terms of like this cinematographer sort of being bigged up into the all seeing, the all sort of controlling image maker. Of course, like, you have huge power ultimately, because you're the last kind of filter for all this imagery to go through, onto the center. So you dictate if something's going to be seen or not, or in focus or not.
And specifically talking about production design, what would your relationship be with the production designer at different points in the filmmaking process?
Yeah, like it's really important to kind of, get on. It can be a really kind of tricky relationship because you're two very sort of creative HODs, and I suppose, you know, it can be sort of maybe a triangle with the director. But you know, like you all have to work together. Like ultimately with all the crew, like we all have vulnerabilities, and we all have like, you know, what way we see it should be, and but you know, there's no point in going off on some kind of tangents where you're not bringing everybody with you. It doesn't work. And
So,
it sort of makes a fault line in things. So yeah, like, you know, discussing with the production designer about color and texture and um, shapes within the space, like you know, furniture, practicals, where windows are, like if they're designing sets, that's massive, like where the window's going to be, doors, it's all like then how you might want to block the scene.
and presumably a good production designer is always designing with shots in mind anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you'd be surprised. Sometimes, like, I think, wow, like they've put so much time into this set, and like we're never going to see that direction, you know. And I mean, I understand this in a way that you maybe have to, like, it's a little bit like method acting, like you have to build the whole room to believe one wall, you know. But yeah, sometimes I feel like sorry for them that it's, you know, so much time and effort gone in, and you know, you have to communicate that, like, you know, this is a moody scene and it's going to be just a shaft of light here, so you know, don't bother too much with information in this part of the frame, or you know. And then that's like, I guess with the shot list, just, you know, if it's a very specific scene that needs a lot of like high-end resources or time or crew, then it's helpful to start to, you know, storyboard where you can send those images out to production designers or, you know, costume designers, that it's like, you know, that they understand that, okay, this scene is going to be all handheld, we won't really be seeing the feet, or you know, like just things where it's amazing, just some, you know, days you turn up and you realize some departments gone to huge detail, and it's just not, you know, then somebody says, no, we don't, she needs to take the shoes off because she's running in this scene and it's over like difficult terrain and she needs to wear runners or whatever, you know. It's just like yeah, communication is massive.
On the other communication in the other direction, I came across this this thing in American Cinematographer,
Yeah.
in 30s, where a bunch of cinematographers called an emergency meeting to complain about the fact that too many Hollywood directors suddenly decided they wanted to move the camera all the time.
Oh.
They don't know what they're doing. And so they were trying to kind of come up with how can we get these idiots to stop moving the camera ridiculously. Do you ever have to kind of, you know, manage upwards, as it were, in terms of sort of explaining the reason why a particular shot mightn't be the best way to direct it?
Yeah, I mean, you know, like, I suppose fundamentally a cinematographer will be out shooting more often than a director. And so you've probably tried and failed at more things than the director has. And so, you know, it's not like you're saying, oh well, I know, I've been there. It's just like, yeah, it's just how you deliver that information, you know. There's no point in going down the same path again when you know that it's just not going to end well.
Sure.
So yeah, of course, like I'm always happy to try things that I failed at if I feel like it's being approached in a different way.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, it's funny that idea of moving the camera. Like, I feel like that's sort of an area that I'm coming last to. Like lighting, composition, seem like the sort of obvious things to me, but actually moving the camera, it feels for me a bit more kind of abstract in terms of how that sort of manifests itself. And I really don't like moving the camera when there's just no reason to move it. Like, let's say with Aract, I remember we had a set of tracks and a dolly. Oh, we didn't actually get a dolly out for the whole shoot, but we had planned days with the track and dolly. And anyway, I was kind of excited. Like, it was like, today's the day we get to like jump on the dolly after like 3 weeks of shooting on head and legs. And anyway, we set it up and we started like moving in, and I was like, oh no, this isn't right. It's like I was saying earlier, where you,
Yeah.
and not like, the track was hugely expensive, but on a small budget, everything counts. And so I was like, oh God, okay, that was a bad decision.
And so
It just,
like, quickly shut it down then.
yeah, like it just felt so wrong. Like, luckily we hadn't shot that. Like, if that scene was scheduled for the first week, I'm sure I would have gone ahead with the track, because I wouldn't have settled into the, by the end of week 1, you should be sort of, the imprint of
Sure.
the approach is sort of, it should be just kind of inhabiting your your brain in such a way that you can't kind of think outside of that. It becomes a kind of a framework.
That's really interesting. So you were kind of feeling the film in your bones at that stage, as
Yeah,
to,
like it is very obvious then when you step outside that. And sometimes there's a good reason to do that. Like that feature I did back in September, it was all very like studio, like studio mode, which is, track and dolly. And that's how we had planned it. But we had planned that right through. But actually, the last week of filming, we had the very final scene of the film, and we started to rehearse. And immediately, I turned to the director and said, "Oh, we need to shoot this handheld. Like, there's no other way to shoot it. It has to be handheld." And he was like, "Yeah, I was just about to say the same thing." And that's sort of, that's just brilliant when you feel like, okay, we've actually taken the full journey here. We were shooting that scene in the last week of the shoot as well. And just to be able to kind of confidently know, like, okay, this is the way we need to go. There's only one way to do this.
and you learn to trust your instincts in those, in that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably that's going to be a lifelong thing, but I think having done so much documentary, you've had to sort of trust your instinct on things, and sort of make calls and stuff quickly. And I think that sort of muscle memory is probably built in now nicely. I mean, it's still, still always learning, and that's the great thing about filmmaking. It's just every day is a new kind of playground.
Absolutely. In terms of kind of acquiring that muscle memory, I mean, what would you say to students? I heard someone describe it recently as kind of like getting your flying hours. Just to get comfortable in doing the thing that you do. I mean, how did you go about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good sort of way of putting it. Like, I when I was in college in Dún Laoghaire, like probably 90% of the films I did were fiction, and that was That seemed to be the only way I kind of knew. And then when I went out to Poland for a couple of years, and they were all shooting on film. And one of the first exercises was to go out with, it must have been 8 minutes of film for a 20-minute film. No, sorry, it was the other way around. So 8 minutes for a 4-minute film. So it was like basically you had, kind of a a really sort of tricky time when to roll the camera, and really kind of decide, okay, do I need to roll it now, or like, will I wait? And so just actually that exercise of knowing, right, I've only got like two chances at this, and then I need to move on to the next part of telling the story. So I think that's really great, like to try and restrict yourself, like give yourself, even if it's digital, just say, right, I've only got 10 minutes and I'm going to make a 5-minute film. Off we go. But sorry, so that was Poland, and that, I shot a couple of documentaries in that mode of just like very minimal resources, and then came back here to shoot His and Hers with Michael Lavelle. So we had been in college together, so the two of us shared the cinematography role in that. And from that, then I was kind of, I suppose, sort of typecast into documentary very quickly. And, I didn't really push against it, because I sort of continually found the projects that were coming to me were like, wow, okay, this is a great way to explore the world and different people, and, just sort of expose myself to all sorts of different kind of scenarios. And I think what happened then was I sort of committed to buying it was a DSLR 5D, and I think that just sort of meant that it, I sort of had this camera all the time with me, and I sort of knew it inside out, and it became kind of an extension of me. It was just sort of like, I didn't have to think about it. It was like, the way you play piano, or, it's just sort of a muscle memory thing. And then from there, invested in a Alexa, it wasn't Alexa Mini, it was the Amira. And again, that was like, seemed like a crazy kind of investment at the time, because you just don't know, am I going to get enough work to sort of keep this going? Am I just like cutting myself here? But I think your commitment to like saying, right, I have this equipment, then people sort of then believe in you as a sort of crew member. And I think it's just, for me, it was just spending time being able to kind of, explore the camera and not be sort of intimidated by it. Because I suppose I'm not like, I'm a techie person, but I'm not like crazy techie, sort of like.
Do you have to be a techie person to be a cinematographer?
I think you need to be interested in technology and the power of it, and how it can, I think fundamentally you need to be like a storyteller, but like you are excited about using technology to sort of, tell that. So like, I wouldn't be reading up sort of techie magazines, but if I have, say, a kind of a challenge within a film, okay, I need this, then I'll start, researching and probably getting a bit nerdy about obsessed with some piece of equipment, but yeah.
It's about problem solving, essentially.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
This could go, there's loads of questions and there's loads more I could ask, but I'm conscious of it being nearly 1:00. And there's two questions I ask everyone who's come and chatted to us to finish up, which is, and there's often, for the first question, there's often not an answer, but can you describe a typical day in your job? Is there a
Oh, God. think it's like atypical. I mean, there's kind of typical days within each phase. Like at the moment, I'm sitting at my computer writing emails, reading scripts, and sort of like pre-planning. Then when it's sort of like, I suppose, more intensive pre-production, it'll be a bit more active, going out, looking at locations. And then obviously shooting is probably the most kind of typical day, as in, every day you go to work at this time, and you scratch your head for many hours, and then you come home again.
I'm home quite late, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, I get completely consumed and very monofocused when I'm working. So, yeah.
Great, thanks a minute. Okay, and the last question is, what qualities do you need to do your job?
Yeah, problem solver, I think, is a good one. An observer, I suppose, good observer, listener. I think you need to have stamina as well. Like, it's no use kind of exploding out of the blocks and then kind of failing at the far end. I suppose it's the collection of images. I think a lot of the time, maybe, young cinematographers get bogged down in particular discrete shots or big kind of sequence or whatever, but they forget about the whole kind of, from start to finish, like the whole arc of the story. So yeah, I think it's about sort of pacing yourself through that whole story. And being a collaborator, fundamentally, that you kind of get you gain energy from people. Like, I probably wouldn't be your typical sort of like crew member, in the way that I'm like a bit shy, and it takes me a while to sort of warm up to people. But I think, you just you need to be open to all your crew. They've everybody comes to the table with great experience, and so many different experiences, and there's just not one way to cut the cloth, or it's sort of, it's always nice to, you're just always learning little tricks from other crew, which is great. Learning every day. That's the typical the typical feature.
That's it. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, from everything you're saying, those are the things that are coming through about collaboration and openness. And I think those are great values for people to aspire to.
Get out there and shoot.
And get out there. Indeed.
Even with your phone, like, I mean, phones have so much power in them now. It's like amazing.
Yeah. Listen, thanks so much, Kate. That was really brilliant. It was so good to and chat. And sorry, there were other questions that come in, just didn't get a chance to get to. But but yeah, thanks again. Really appreciate it.
All right. Take care.